Okay, well, good morning, everyone. My name is Charlene Krepikavich. I'm the CEO of Via Sport BC. It's my pleasure to welcome you to attend this webinar on some information that we're going to share with our colleagues at the Community Gaming Grants. Before I begin and introduce our dear colleague, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm calling in on the unceded and traditional territories of the Squamish, the Tsleil-Waututh and Musqueam First Nations. And it's really my honor to live, work, and play on these lands. And really, it is important to acknowledge, to have a land acknowledgement so that we can really reflect on how lucky we are to be here and have the First Nations communities steward these lands over multiple generations. So today we're going to talk about community gaming grants, and I know many of you have had lots of questions. We've had questions over the last number of months, and we've reached out to our colleagues at the Community Gaming Branch to offer this webinar for you. I have with us Amy Bond, who's the Acting Manager of Policy and Outreach with the Community Gaming Grants Office within the Ministry of Municipal Affairs. And I just wanted to say that just to provide some context, is that gaming was legislated back in 2002, and it's under the Gaming Control Act, and the funds that this go through the community gaming branch within the Ministry of Municipal Affairs. And so every year, many sport organizations apply for community gaming grants, and there's typically about 140 million, and Amy will get into all the details. 140 million available every year, and sport gets about 21% of that budget. And within that sort of 21%, 86% of it, about 24 plus million, goes to local clubs. So it's a lot of money, and we're very, very grateful to have access to these funds, and I really appreciate that Amy came here today to provide you with some additional information. So I'm going to pass the virtual baton over to Amy, and Amy, I'll let you take it away.
Great, thanks, Charlene. Hello and welcome. I will begin. There. So here we go. I am just going to share my screen here, and thank you very much for inviting me. I'm just going to go over a quick little overview here. So what I'll talk about today is what's new in 23-24, new policies, a little bit of an overview of the Community Gaming Grants program. We will talk about the mandatory organization eligibility criteria, program eligibility, the financial components, how to apply for the grant, and the spending rules once you get it. And I will quickly give an overview of the capital project grant, which is sort of a separate program we run. So, and we're going to just try to move through this pretty quickly so that we do have time for questions. I will ask that you put your questions into the chat if you have any, and we will go through those all at the end of the presentation. I did want to acknowledge that today I'm coming to you from the lands of the Lekwungen people, who are known today as the Esquimalt and Songhees Nations. So I thank them for their stewardship of this land, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity to live, work, and connect with my community here. And I try to participate in acts of ongoing reconciliation in my personal and professional life. All right, so what's new? So if you've looked at the guidelines that were published for this February 2023, quick update for our COVID-19 pandemic response policies. Some of you who have applied in the past may know that we rolled back a lot of our policies. We weren't enforcing them during the pandemic, starting right as soon as that first call came in March 2020. Since then, we have been hoping to get back to normal. And 2023 is the first year that we're starting to. So out of all the changes that we made in 2020. The two that are remaining are the policies about the organizational surplus criteria, that 50% surplus policy, and the 75% government funding on the program. So both of those policies we will be flexible with this year. However, the biggest change to this is that rather than just not applying it across the board, we are asking applicants to tell us if it's a direct result of the pandemic, and that is when we will be flexible. So ways that you can do that is if your expenses were unusually low compared to a pre-COVID year because of programming interruptions, you can tell us, describe the impacts to the pandemic in your program description. You could even show us what your costs were before the pandemic compared to what they have been since. Other reasons may be a large amount of government COVID relief grants or loans. Maybe you've received a lot of extra grants close to your fiscal year end, or you just haven't been able to spend it yet because the restart has been slow. So point that out, make it very obvious to the reader. If you have loans, these CEBA loans, even if they might become grants, it should be included as a liability until either repayment is due or it becomes a grant. So that's the biggest change for the COVID policy. There is a spot on the application again this year for you to say if and how your programs were impacted by the pandemic, and to provide just the current balance of the gaming account so we know where you're at financially there. Other key changes that were made, we've increased the local funding level from 100,000 to 125,000. So this is the maximum amount of funding a local organization can get. So that's been bumped up. We've also combined the regional and provincial funding levels into that maximum grant for 250. So previously regional organizations could only get 225. We've just combined those. So it's a local funding level and then greater than local, essentially. And we have made a permanent change to allow our grant funds to be used to create new paid positions. So in prior years, it had to be, that position had to be in existence more than a year before we would look at it. Yeah. So just a quick overview. As mentioned already, community gaming grants is funded with commercial gaming revenue. And part of this is, so we support community-driven programming. It's not government identified initiatives. We have the money because it comes out of the commercial gaming revenue. And the origins of that was to go back into the communities for community identified needs to kind of undo any of the social harms that may come from having gambling in the communities. So out of the 140 million, 135 million is earmarked for our regular community gaming grants program. This is the programming grants that we're going to talk about today, helping not-for-profits deliver these programs. It is not competitive. All eligible applications will receive funding of some level. Over 90% of the applicants receive a grant, and the average grant amount is just over 28,000. That was for last year. We fund approximately 5,000 organizations every year all across BC. The other 5 million was given to us in 2017 to develop a capital projects program. So this helps not-for-profits with their capital projects or major acquisitions. This one is a competitive grant process because of the limited funding, and it is typically oversubscribed every year. Grants are between 20,000 and up to 250,000. You have to have matching funds, and there is a separate program guide for that. Sectors. So our program supports 6 unique sectors. I've put up the description for sport there on the screen. Other than sports, we also fund arts and culture, public safety, environment, Human and Social Services, and the Parent Advisory Committee, or PACs, and the district PACs. So a lot of things. Most of those, except for the PACs, have their own guide. All the rest of the sectors are under the same program guidelines. Funding levels. So we mentioned we increased the maximum amount for local organizations up to 125,000. And the maximum, if you're greater than local, is 250,000. So we get asked about this a lot. Our funding levels are based on the size and scope of the programming as presented in the application, typically through the program description and the financial need as shown in the actual program costs from the previous year. Additional factors may include the overall demand on our program and the available funding, so our budget. Just go on here to the next slide, a little bit more about the funding levels. So again, it's based on the size and scope of programming. We're looking in the program description. So for this will be things like who, what, where, when. That who is really important too for sports. We ask for the total number of registered participants. And if you have multiple components, you can break that down in the program description and tell us how many in each level, even if someone is counted twice, because we know certain, athletes do register for more than one kind of sub-program sometimes. Designation as a regional or a provincial level applicant does not guarantee funding over the maximum amount. If you're trying to access funding greater than the local level, you're probably already at or close to that maximum grant of 125,000. The applicant will have expenses that support a need for a higher level of funding without exceeding that 75% government limit. So if your annual expenses all in are $100,000, it's very unlikely that we would give you even more than what your expenses were, is what we're saying. You've got to demonstrate that you have the need for that additional funding. There will be few or no other comparable services in your jurisdiction. And you can provide letters of support from organizations in your same sector and region that recognize yours as the leader. So we can't have multiple organizations all in the same area who are doing the same thing and all trying to tell us that they're the regional lead, because we can't decide that. That's for the communities. So that's what that comes down to. But really is a lot more information is in Appendix 1. How many people do you serve? Are you in multiple communities? Do you have a huge geographic reach? Are you the lead? I did have a note on the last slide there about the budget alignment supporting the request. So that's just an example. If you're requesting additional funds, it helps if that's reflected in the budget as well. It supports the request. So we'll talk a little bit about the organization eligibility. This is across the board for all of our sectors, mandatory criteria. Not-for-profit organizations that operate primarily for community benefit, delivering programs or services in the community, have an open membership. There's a volunteer board that's voted in by their membership. More than double the number of voting members to board members. That just is in place to make sure that you're getting democratic elections happening. If you have more board members, if you don't have that more than double, they can just select themselves. So we want to make sure that there's people involved in the organization and there's a process and opportunity to get involved. 2/3 residing in BC, Sometimes people live cross-border, that's fine, but it is primarily for programs and organizations in British Columbia, so the people running them should be here. And then board members do not receive remuneration. So that goes back to being a volunteer board. It's not for paid board members. You can have some paid staff, but the board and the membership are doing so voluntarily. Ineligible if it's a for-profit organization, or if you're sustaining a for-profit organization. Member-funded society is a legal term. It depends on how you're registered through BC registries. Doesn't mean that you take membership fees. You have to go out of your way to register as member-funded. And it means that all of your members are actually shareholders who can take out dividends. So if you don't know, it probably doesn't apply to you. We don't fund political parties, political action groups, lobby groups. We don't fund any level of government, whether it's federal, provincial, regional, municipal, First Nation, any other kind of local government, or any government facilities. We don't fund professional or industry associations, and we don't fund religious institutions. Talk a little bit about the programs here. So we do support a wide range of programs going across those 6 sectors. Applications are submitted on a program basis. So you can submit one application and have multiple programs on it if you choose. There is no limit to the amount of programs that you might run. Program delivery, so it has to be running at the time of application and be ongoing. So we won't fund programs that haven't been delivered yet. Projects, something that you're hoping to do in a couple of years, and it has to be delivered by the applicant. So if you're doing something in conjunction with another organization, you need to decide who is the lead. It's typically the organization handling most of the money, and that is the one that can apply. Community benefit. So you should be responsive to your community's needs. Should be accessible and inclusive, so no unnecessary restrictions to who can participate, and provide this immediate direct service to the community. So ineligible programming is delivered on contract under funding agreements. If it is only operating a facility or a venue, we're more interested in what's happening inside that facility. What are the activities? Maybe that's something that we'd look at funding, but not just keeping it open. Financial assistance to individuals. So this is taking grant funds and putting it into the pockets of individuals. You can use your grant funds to cover costs to bring down registration fees for everyone. That's fine, but the grant funds themselves don't get turned into checks and given to people for assistance. Vocational training and professional development. You can use your grant funds to train volunteers, but not paid staff. If they're on staff or a contract, that is their job, then the grant funds can't be used for any training or education. Fundraising or social enterprise programs. Again, we would be more interested, what are you fundraising for? Is there an activity you want to do? We would like to fund that activity, not the fundraising action itself. And selling, like tangible goods or foods to participants, offering goods at a discount. So we're not funding that. If it's part of a program, like you feed your kids after practice, that's another story. That's not just sitting selling them. Primarily benefiting other organizations. So typically there's no individuals involved. Or if you're not delivering an immediate direct service, those are typically just things like research or networking programs. Don't see it a lot in sports. Describing. We get a lot of questions. How do we write our program description? This should be like your elevator pitch. If you're talking to someone, riding up 10 floors, telling them about your program. It should be clear and succinct. It shouldn't be 12 pages long, but it shouldn't be so vague that we're wondering what the heck is happening. So you can go over the who, what, when, where, how. Mentioned there, the who is in sports is typically who's registered participants. And you can break that out if you need to. The what, like what are the activities? Do you just run a season of a sport, or do you have a bunch of other training camps? What's going on? When is like frequency? How often does it run? Well, maybe we practice for 90 minutes twice a week, and we have 3-hour games every weekend between October and May. Great, there's the frequency. Where is the program delivered? Do you own your own facility and you deliver it indoors? Do you have to rent fields or ice space? How? So the how you can talk about, how is it delivered? So do you have volunteers delivering it? Do you have paid staff? You can also talk about how the program is accessible. How do you ensure that accessibility and inclusivity? Do your coaches do safe sport training? Do you have gender neutral washrooms that were installed? What have you done? That's your place where you can tell us about that other work that you're doing to make sure it's accessible to everyone. Now, last year we did start looking at new programs that had not been delivered for a full year yet. You can apply for those. There's a little bit of additional information we look at because we're used to funding things that have already been happening. So we ask for a plan. How do you continue to keep the program going in the long term? Demonstrating capacity is just showing that you have the volunteers or the staff or the funds available to keep it going with a little help from community gaming grants. And then tell us, what need are you filling in the community? Did someone just feel like doing this new program, or was there an identifiable gap in service? So we'll talk about programs here. I said we fund on a program basis. Most sports programs will have one eligible program. Like this example here with Sunshine Hockey Society. The program that they run is everything that the organization does. So for this, they have a season of play. They include all age groups in it. Their costs are ice rentals, coach wages, materials, equipment, advertising, that kind of thing. However, some organizations might have a number of different distinct programs. So for Sunshine Athletic Society, they have a soccer association there. They run a youth soccer season. They also have flag football and rugby running in the fall and the spring. Different kids register. Then they also do a spring break and a summer kids camps. And these are, 1 week long camps that run all day. These are very distinct activities, and there's different people registering for them. So they're separate programs. So if Sunshine Athletics wanted to apply for this, they would add 3 programs to their single application, and each program would have separate program descriptions and separate program financials. I'll go over the financial eligibility here. So we look at it on 2 levels, as an organization as a whole, and then for each program. These are the 2 criteria that I mentioned at the beginning. We are still being flexible on if you don't meet the criteria because of the pandemic. So a surplus calculation is that organization is temporarily not eligible to receive a grant if it has more than half of the previous year's expenses on hand in unrestricted funds. So how we look at this, and I'll show you an example of financial documents on the next page here. As we take the current assets, these are cash assets. What is liquid? Cash in bank, cash in hand, short-term investments, and we subtract. your current liabilities. We'll subtract the gaming funds. What do you have left in the gaming account at that year end? And we'll subtract any internally and externally restricted funds. Deferred revenue is also included in as a liability. I would say if you are receiving registration fees for the future year before your fiscal year end, definitely make sure that you're categorizing those as a deferred revenue, because those aren't for that year, it's for the next year. And then we divide that by the operating expenses of that year. Times 100 gives us that surplus percentage. So general purpose, contingency, rainy day funds, we don't consider as unrestricted. So internally restricted funds are those things that are designated by the board or the membership for a specific purpose. Examples in our guidelines include capital projects and acquisitions, because these are typically what we see funds being restricted for. But it could also apply to other things, really anything that's outside the usual course of business. If your organization needs to save up money towards something to be able to execute it, you can restrict funds for that. I have seen it for, we're developing a new program. We can't get it off the ground unless we save up for 2 years, or a project, hiring some new positions, a one-time group travel. If it's something that you're doing all the time, then of course that would just be regular operating costs, and that wouldn't be considered. So that's general purpose, as usual operating costs. Might include regularly scheduled maintenance. If it's something, maintenance on some equipment or a building that you do every year, that's not really outside of the usual course of business. If it's a bigger project, you need to save up and you're only doing it once every 10 years or something, that is outside your regular course of business. You can restrict for that. So here's just an example of some simple financial statements to show you where we're looking. On the left here on the balance sheet, we're looking at the cash on hand, cash in the bank, short-term investments. We don't include things like your capital assets or prepaid expenses. Those aren't liquid. You can't get those out, so they're not included. We deduct here current liabilities. Usually have your accounts payable, deferred revenue. One note, if you do have deferred revenue, please make a note of what that includes. Sometimes the gaming grant is included there, sometimes it's not. We do not want to deduct it twice, so that's why we're asking. If you get that in your letter, please tell us what's included in deferred revenue. We just don't want to deduct the gaming grant twice. And then down below for the fund balances, your externally restricted funds should have some kind of a note saying the source or the purpose. Does not need any minutes. The internally restricted funds should be clearly identified in the notes. If you have multiple for different purposes, it's helpful to break it out. And those should be supported with minutes, dated minutes from the meeting where it was restricted, so we can see exactly what it's for. Typically, either the notes or the minutes are not 100% clear, so having both of them to compare helps us understand what those funds are actually restricted for. Hopefully I've covered some of the questions about those, but if not, I hope you're putting your questions in the chat and I can answer as soon as I get through. The program financial eligibility is really just that piece on government funding. So we only consider federal and provincial funding as government in this. So it cannot provide more than 75% of the total program cost. The remaining 25% has to come from community sources. So user fees, your registrations, right? Fundraising, municipal government, local, private, other grants, also in-kind contributions. This is why we ask that your program revenue sources are clearly identified If you're using acronyms, it might be really difficult for us to know what that source is. And then we're relying on Google. So you'll see here in the financial eligibility, or in the program actuals here, we've got federal department, provincial ministry, community gaming grant. We'll add those up and divide by the total down here. That lets us know what the percentage is. We've got in-kind also included on here, and you'll notice that it is the same amount, so it cancels each other out. That keeps the budget there balanced. But what it also does is it increases that total expense line. That changes the ratio when we're doing this calculation. So if you do have in-kind, this is why it's good to help it. In this example, I think we've got 7,000 in government funding, and it would be something like 46% of the cash expenses at 15,000. But it gets brought down to 25% when you add the in-kind. So what am I talking about in-kind? These are volunteer contributions. So this is things like donated time. You've got your parent volunteers coming out and helping to run things. Any donated professional labor. Maybe someone's a bookkeeper and they're doing your books for free or giving you a 30% discount. Maybe you've got some donated materials from local businesses. You can count those. We typically value general volunteer labor at $20 an hour. If it is a professional service, you can make a note what the fair market value is. Same as any goods, materials in kind. So we ask if you do this to provide an in-kind summary so we can see how you got those figures. So that could be saying something like 20 volunteers at $20 an hour for 200 hours over the year. It just shows us where you got your numbers from. And as I mentioned, it should be listed the same amount as a revenue and expense. And it's just a great way also to show that you've got community support. When you've got businesses and people giving their time and their services, that shows that. So applying for the grant, I'm just going to quickly go through some screenshots here because I know a lot of folks have a hard time actually accessing the online form. So this would be the landing page that you go to on the Community Gaming Grants website. Always stay over on the left. There's a button that says online service. I will say before applying, I do strongly suggest you look at the application tutorials and the checklists. They're helpful. The tutorial shows more screenshots than what I'm going to show you here with specific instructions too. So you can actually walk your way through. So that button will take you to this page where it says launch online service. Right there, push that button. And that will take you to this page. This is where folks typically get lost because if you scroll down, there's a lot of other links and buttons in the center panel. So stay away from them. Stay to the left under where it says apply online. These are links that will take you to those applications. So Community Gaming Grants is right on top. We've got our other grants there. If you're applying for licensed gaming, there's links for that. Special approvals, we'll talk about that too. And the application intake, we're in it now for sports, March 1st to May 31st. Our capital projects will be in the summer, typically June and July. Specific dates are still to be announced, but we're pretty solid on having that summer intake. Just general tips and advice. Read the program guidelines. Look at the pre-application checklist and save any of your documents as Word, PDF, or Excel. I always say put it in a folder on your desktop that's easy to find, so it's really easy for you to just load those onto the online application. You're not hunting for them. We do have example documents on our website. those financial statements, everything. If possible, have a professional review your financials. Just things like that little piece of advice, how to defer revenue if you get your registration fees ahead of your fiscal year. Little bits of advice like that can help a lot. You can also phone us. We have a helpline. Typically, someone is available every day. We do try to make sure we've got multiple people on when we're getting close to a sector intake closing date. Also, if relevant, address any items from your previous notification letter. So if you're a return applicant, look at your notification letter you got with your grant last year and see if we asked you any questions. Did we ask what makes up your deferred revenue, or what were those funds restricted for? It wasn't clear. Have a look at it and make sure that you address that. Make sure your gaming account summary reports are up to date. And also apply as early as possible. We do review and process the applications in the date order received. We do our very best, but late applications are not guaranteed and they might not be processed. If you are not satisfied with the outcome of your application, you can also request a reconsideration within 30 days of receiving your notification, and you should state the reasons why you think the decision should be changed or overturned. You can just do that through email to us actually, and just say reconsideration request in the subject line, include your file number or the application number. You can include clarifying information and documents, but not anything brand new. So it's not a do-over. Is to see if we made an error or if something was misinterpreted. And then you'll get a final decision on that within 90 days. So spending the grant, we have a few rules around how you can spend the funds. We're getting a bit more loose on this the last couple of years. So anything basically that's essential to delivering your program. If you have wages of positions, including contractors, that's covered. Any kind of rent, utilities, insurance, supplies that you need for the program, office supplies that you need to administer it, internet, phone, advertising, rent or purchasing any equipment that you need. Travel, that's essential for it within BC. And out of province travel, you have to submit a separate request. That is back on that online service that I was showing you, where you go down to the bottom of that list. It says special requests or special approvals, and you find it through there. I do think that you have to choose grants or licenses, and it's under licensing. That's because you submit that request, whether it's your grant funds or if it's licensed gaming revenue. You can also use your grant funds now for a percentage of just organization general operating costs. So up to 15% of the total grant. And you can just make that transfer into your operating account. And we don't ask what it ultimately went to other than general operating. So that's things that might not fall under our typical eligibility criteria. Like maybe board insurance or legal costs or something else out there. There's just a spot on the gaming account summary report where you can say if you did make that transfer or not, and what percentage, and that's all we ask for tracking purposes. Let's see, you can also ask for additional money for a minor capital project that's valued under $20,000 that is essential for the program that you're requesting funding for, or you can ask for additional funding for capital acquisitions. Again, it has to be directly tied to the program that you're requesting funding for. For capital projects, you have to submit a quote, third-party quote or estimate. For acquisition items, we only ask for a quote if any single item is over $5,000. So if it's less than that, we don't. What I will say is if you're asking for a lot of something that costs less than that, but the total is over, it is helpful to tell us like how much you're asking. If you need to buy 300 new helmets at $300 each for a total of X, just put that in the program description so we know how much extra you're actually asking for that one-time purchase. And yeah, so, and then we don't need the quotes if it's under 5,000 for an acquisition, just the projects, if there's like some kind of construction going on. That's on top of the regular program. Just include it within the program description and the increased level that you're asking for. And it will be considered when we have the budget for it. When you get the grant, you can spend it from the minute it's deposited and forward. You should have it all spent within 12 months of receiving it. You can also apply some of the payments backwards for expenses that you've already incurred when it's within the same fiscal year. If you try to pay a cost that's from a different fiscal year, that's counted as past debt, and that's not allowed, or any future costs that you haven't been billed for yet is also not allowed. If you do want to pay back expenses that maybe you've already paid for out of your general account, you can transfer those funds from gaming to the general, but hang on to your original invoices or receipts so that you have something to back that up. We will deposit the funds into your designated gaming account. When possible, you should try to pay expenses directly from there. As mentioned, if you can't, you can reimburse your general account for those program expenses and hang on to those invoices or receipts for up to 5 years. That's how long we are allowed to do audits for. So keep it for that long and you should be good. Keep up to date with your gaming account summary report. This is just an annual report, so within 90 days of your fiscal year end, and just reporting on the grant funds in that account. You will not receive a reminder from us. We have tried to do that, but we've not found a successful way to send reminders. And basically the details of it, there'd be a balance, opening balance at the beginning of the form. I'll show you an example in a minute what it looks like. It looks like a tax form, but it's really not that scary. We look at the opening balance to ensure that's the same as the closing from the last year. How that the grant funds received or what we gave, how many grant funds were dispersed, how did you spend the money, and then the balance at the end. So we do a little bit of quick math to make sure it balances and look at that list of payments that you made to make sure it's all eligible. There's also a section that asks how the community benefited. I think for sports, you could say like how many participants you had and what they did. You know, maybe we had 30 skaters come into our figure skating this year and 3 of them went to nationals. That's great. So this is just a quick visual. This is what the gaming account summary report looks like. We do have a copy of the sample completed one on our website. We also have a tutorial telling you what all those lines mean. A lot of it will only be pertinent if you also do licensed gaming. If you don't, you're only filling out like a portion of this. And so this on the right side here, this is where you would put how you spend the money. This is what's primarily important to us at Community Gaming Grants, where we're looking at the dates are within that fiscal year. You've got some kind of reference number, the check number or EFT. Who is it dispersed to? So this one says Staples for office supplies, photo paper, and then the amount. Now another one here says program coordinator. The purpose is wages. Great, like that's very clear. We don't need a lot of detail, but just clear on what it's for. And then room for the banking information. The open area there is to tell us how the community benefited, and the sign off from the at least 2 board members. Quickly, I'm going to rush through this capital project overview. I will have another webinar coming out mid-June after our new guidelines are published on it. So basically it's for capital projects with a cost between 20,000 up to 1.25 million. We will fund between 20 and 50% of the total cost of a project up to a maximum of 250,000. Matching funds have to be in place. It's typically a summer intake, like June, July. 1 application per year, 1 grant per project. You can still apply for your annual community gaming grant to support your program and a capital project, just 1 of each. And then the categories are facilities, so construction or renovation of a building, community infrastructure, things like playgrounds, outdoor structures, walking trails, and then acquisitions. So a fixed capital asset, like a vehicle, computer system, specialized equipment, or something like that. It has a scoring process. This information here is within the guidelines, how it's all broken out, with more detail actually. And then I'll just give you some resources so you know how to reach me. So if you are looking to talk to the outreach manager, you can reach me by email at cggoutreach@gov.bc.ca. I can book a virtual appointment with you, and we talk about your file, look through your letter. I can give you some advice on what you need to do before applying. If you just have a general question like, did we send in our gaming account summary report? I can't remember, or something along those lines. You can also email our general email up here, or just phone us. This 250-356-1081 is a general phone line, and we have grant analysts answering every day. I just did want to mention as well, we have partners in the Nonprofit Society at the British Columbia Association of Charitable Gaming. They are a nonprofit that receives grants to help charities and community groups apply for grants. They also do these kinds of presentations. They can help you with your application. They can actually do a little bit more on that end than I can. I can provide advice, but I can't look at your documents and tell you if it's good enough or not, because I am in the government. They are not. And then they also have branches across the province. So we have the Northern Lights Community Charitable Gaming Association up in Dawson Creek. We have one in Prince George, Chilliwack, Kelowna, Victoria, Comox, and then Vancouver so they're the provincial one, but they'll also do Greater Vancouver area. And they cover a huge territory. So it's not just within that city, but within that kind of region. So you can also contact them for some help. So that is all that I have. Thank you very much for listening to me, and I would like to take your questions.
Thank you so much, Amy. That was a lot of information, very detailed presentation. Yeah, thank you so much. There are some questions, so let's pass it over to Ninu and Alfonso to see if there's some way to identify some themes there.
Yeah, great. There were a lot of questions, about 40. Many of them we could group. There were similar questions. There were some specific questions around financials, eligibility, and other eligible expenses. And I think, Amy, you want to be contacted directly from that about those is probably the best advice to give on those specific questions. But there were some more general questions. A group around defining some terms. So could you go over one more time, or maybe in a little more thoroughness, what is a registered not-for-profit? Like, what does that mean? There were a few questions about that.
Okay, like for the mandatory eligibility.
Yeah.
So you don't actually have to be a registered not-for-profit. You can be, and there's a couple ways to do that. You can be federally registered as a charity, or you can be provincially incorporated as a not-for-profit society. If you are not, you're still eligible for a community gaming grant. If you're not registered under one of those authorities, we would look at the constitution and bylaws that you're submitting. So you would have to have some kind of formal structure where you get together with your membership and you set that up. Constitution is your purpose, like your mandate. And that will say what the purpose of your organization is. That should say something about existing for community benefit to, deliver sports in the community of blah, 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 to promote basketball to youth in this region. So that's what we're looking at. If your purpose is to support Acme basketball companies, businesses across the province, then that's not nonprofit, that's supporting a for-profit. So that's what we're looking at there, if you're not registered.
Great. Can you define what open membership means a little more?
Yeah, so no unnecessary restrictions on it. So anybody in the community can kind of join. If there is any restrictions, it should have a rationale tied to it. So if your purpose is to serve a specific identified group of people, then you might want to restrict membership or some board capabilities even to that. And that's covered under the Human Rights Code. If we've asked you if your membership is open or not, it would probably be a good idea to contact me directly so we can look at the file and see if there's something in your bylaws that's indicating that it's not.
Great. Here's an easy one. Who can provide a letter of support? Just go over that one more time.
Okay, so that would be like to support, you want to say that you're the regional lead in your area or something. So other organizations that are doing similar work. Just trying to think here, if you're trying to come up with an example. So I'm here in Victoria, Capital Region. Maybe there's one group that is organizing all of the hockey leagues together. And you have a bunch of other hockey associations that have their teams, but then one is bringing them all together. It's providing other services for the organization. You're going to get those letters from those other teams that you're supporting. If there are none in your jurisdiction, then maybe you would have a letter of support from other community members, maybe someone on your local council saying, yeah, Acme Tennis Club is really great in our community because there are no other tennis clubs. You have to drive 3.5 hours to get to the next tennis club. And all these people come from all around, and it's a small community, but they're coming from everywhere to come and play tennis. So that helps.
Great. And then related to that, good segue, there were a couple of questions about defining local versus regional organization. And also related to that, if you aren't the lead organization in providing a service, but you might be part of a group that does that qualify as regional?
You're not the lead, but you're part of a group that does. I'm not really, I guess I don't know if I can really answer that so much. And again, just going back to that designation as regional or provincial doesn't guarantee any kind of level of funding. So it's really if you're at that top level and you're stuck, you've been getting 100 or 125,000 for years, and you're like, why can't we get more? And we keep saying, well, you're a local organization and you want to show that you're not. It's probably better to contact us directly to see what that barrier is.
Okay, perfect. Now, just a couple of questions about financials. can you provide some clarity on restricted funds? What is the difference between external and internal restricted funds, for example? And how long could internal restricted funds be deemed that way?
Okay, so an externally restricted fund is restricted by the source. So this would be if you get a grant specifically for a project, or sometimes you'll get a private donation, but it's for a specific thing. We see like bequeathals, that kind of thing, or maybe the city gives you a grant and says, this is for the facility. You can't use it to buy equipment. That's externally restricted. Internally restricted funds is the organization or the board getting together and saying, hey, we have an unusual cost that's going to be coming up. We need to start putting away money or we're not going to be able to do it. Same as in our personal finances, right? We know that that car is going to die next year or soon. So we start trying to put away money so we can replace it when it happens. So and I think I talked a little bit about it outside the usual course of business. So kind of regular restrictions you can hold on to for up to 5 years before we start asking, hey, when are you going to spend those? If it's for a capital project, like some kind of bigger building project, it's 7 years. And typically when you get to that 5 or 7 year mark, if we keep seeing those funds are still sitting there, it's growing, it hasn't been used, we'll reach out to ask too. We'll put something in your letter and say, are you planning to do this project anytime soon? It looks like you've got enough saved now. Like it can't just be perpetual.
Okay, I think that's a pretty good answer. And like always, if there are any specific questions, feel free to reach out and ask Amy and her team directly. Just a few more. One around eligibility. So just to clarify, are university sports clubs eligible for these grants or not?
That, I hate to say it, but that depends. I have seen some that do and some that don't. Typically, if they have a separate not-for-profit setup, they might be. If it is actually directly tied into the university, like we can't give money to the university.
Right. Two more questions quickly. One is related to revenue and Via Sport. A few questions around this. So does Via Sport hosting grant money count as provincial revenue?
Okay, so no. So any third-party source, even if it was originally sourced from government, if it's going out through another third party, then it is not government revenue.
Great. And maybe just a good one to end on. How is funding allocated? For example, is it first come, first serve?
To a certain respect, we do process them in the date order received. But that's not how we make our funding decisions. So we really look at that size and scope. I know I keep saying that. What that means is we're looking at your program description to see how many people are participating, who's participating, is it accessible and inclusive? How important is this to your community? What is the frequency of the activities? That tells us a bit about the size and the scope. And we look at the financials, the total program expenses. How much does it cost you to deliver it? How much do you actually need to sustain this and help? You know, we want to keep programs that are already going to continue operating and maybe be like that cream on top, make it a little bit nicer.
Right, great. Just the last thing is a reminder that we will share out the presentation recording with everybody who we invited to this call, so fear not. You'll get that in the next few days. And that is it from the questions. So thank you very much.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you so much, Amy, and to the Via Sport team for hosting this event, and to all of you who took time out of your busy schedule to join the call. We really appreciate it. We hope this information was useful. Amy provided some email addresses and phone numbers, and they are willing to help. So please reach out to them to get your specific questions answered. And thank you again for taking time out. I hope you are successful in that grant and can see more kids and youth playing community sport across the province. So thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks again.